BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Sheila Dillon. It's wildness, fresh waters and invasive shellfish, millions of them. Shellfish that are also delicious. So why shouldn't we just eat them? Eat them to extinction, as my colleague Dan Saladino might say. That's the issue in this edition of the Food Programme. No one will be setting off fireworks or hiring jazz bands, but next year marks 50 years since a certain crustacean first invaded UK waters, the American Signal Crayfish. Since then, there's been no stopping them, decimating our fish and their native white-clawed cousins, as well as undermining riverbanks and exacerbating flooding.
You see lots of little 3-inch holes that everybody sort of thinks, oh, they're rat holes. But they're not. They're crayfish burrows and they go back about 2 to 3 feet. And then that collapses and goes into the river.
We'll hear more from Andrew Leach by the River Kennet later. Right now I'm faced by a lot, really a lot of them, simmering in great cooking vats, on the way to being ready for 50 or so keen diners due to turn up in about half an hour. A year ago, it was more of a shock when I was faced with 10,000 or more live ones, freshly pulled in traps from the River Kennet. Well, we'll go back there in a few minutes, but tonight I'm at a Louisiana-style all-you-can-eat crayfish boil in a railway arch that's home to a company brewing mead nectars. Oddly, it turns out, deliciously just the Louisiana thing. Bob Ring is MC, head chef and general go-to for this event and for all things crayfish.
Our 40, 50 kilo of crayfish have now come to that near boil. They've turned red. They look much more appetising when they're red, don't they? What we're going to do now is chuck a few kilos of ice into the pot. The hot crayfish sucks in the flavour. That's the ice going in.
Bob, now more often known as Crayfish Bob, has been trapping and eating crayfish in the UK for over 20 years. A journey that began on travels through Finland and Sweden, seeing their relish for crayfish. So how did Signal Crayfish end up here? Well, they didn't come straight from the United States. They detoured via Sweden. They'd imported them because their native crayfish were dying out from a disease, a plague, the signals were impervious to. And from there, with the blessing of the UK government, they moved in with us.
And the government brought them over in 76 with the idea of selling them back to Sweden. But 2 things happened with that plan. One was the Chinese also started farming them. They started supplying Scandinavia very cheaply. And also, of course, you don't have to farm them in your water. There's these other people, they're just running around picking them up from all over the place. And I think it was 96 or even later where it suddenly became like, no, you can't do that anymore. But by that time, you've got them all over the place.
Why did you start having these crayfish boils?
Started because I wanted to get rid of a large quantity of crayfish without having to shell them all. And so these people come along and they do it for you. It's fantastic.
With a lot of enthusiasm.
With a lot of enthusiasm. Isn't that great?
Hi, I'm Carrie Ann Paul.
And I'm Mark Quirk.
I'm from Louisiana. Being from there and living here, you don't often get a chance to have kind of food from home because it's quite a niche cuisine. And so he does a great job with the spices and it's just great.
The crawfish are slightly different, like cousin species or whatever. But the way Bob cooks it, he cooks it in the New Orleans and South Louisiana tradition. And it's spicy and it's tasty, and it includes sausage and corn and potatoes.
My name's CJ Little Coco. I'm a broadcaster, music journalist and DJ. I have a show on One Jazz called The Swamp Boogie. My earliest memory of going to Louisiana was the friendliness of the locals who said, we're going to throw you a crawfish boil. So you go into someone's backyard, they get a massive vat, and then you all stand around a table and they lift it up and they tip it onto the newspaper, and you're all standing there communally bathing in this lovely welcoming atmosphere, eating this crawfish together. And then of course the Londoner is there struggling with 2 hands and a knife and a fork, and then Louisianans are standing there with one hand doing one in each hand.
Yeah. Behind my grandmother's house, we had a small bayou. When we were little, we put nets out. I don't know what the equivalent would be here, but there were sort of 4 wires on it, and you set it out on the ground and wait for the crawfish to come and get whatever bait you've got, and then you just pick it up and it kind of closes the net. And so it was so much fun because you close the net and they're all so when you're like, 10, this is like the best thing you could possibly do.
So that's how you developed a taste for them.
Yeah, I'd say pretty early on. Yeah.
So I was always led to believe that Cajuns were very resourceful in using whatever they had to hand. So the spices, the crayfish, alligators, all kinds of roadkill, oysters, all this stuff that comes naturally from the earth, and it's about ingenuity.
It's kind of controversial. Some people find it disgusting. Other people think it's the best part. I tend to be on the latter part. So if you suck the juices out of the head, it's a real kind of a spice rush. But there are people that are just like, I will never do that.
Sucking crayfish heads. But the question did make me wonder where Bob had got these particular crayfish from.
All of the ones I've got here today have come from either a project on the Tame up in Oxfordshire or from the River Lee near Ware. Both of them are angling clubs. Keen to get rid of them all. I prefer that sort of setup because I got into this because of the environment. I didn't get into this to be a fishmonger. I mean, the two may go together, but I don't want it just to be the fishmonger bit. And that's part of my struggle, really. And I might get through 3 or 4 ton of crayfish last year. Did I make a dent? Absolutely not. I know lakes where you could get all of them out of that one lake.
There weren't many native Brits in the young, enthusiastic crowd. Eugene, from Singapore, cast some light on why that might be.
I think it's difficult, right? You have to sit down and crack it open, but it's really fun. It's like a fun experience.
That seems to be the issue, that British people don't actually want to eat crayfish, or they don't know about crayfish, or, it's just like a lot of bother.
I think it's really funny you say that because a lot of my British friends would say, oh yeah, I don't like fish except for fish and chips, which is really funny, but I love it. I absolutely love it.
When you get the odd hipster, they tend to come for eat like a quarter of a kilo and go and watch a movie, whereas most of this gang will hang in there all night and they go, get Bob, more crayfish, and then we keep going until they go, okay, you've beaten me.
Hi, it's Natalia speaking.
Are you from Ukraine?
Yes, I'm from Ukraine. How do you know? I love crayfish, and I found online, and I loved it so much because of the atmosphere, because of how many people are coming and they are so happy. But I have never tried this recipe before. In Ukraine we have less spicy, but I love spice, so it's brilliant for me.
Well, that's the London take on a Louisiana boil, but we wanted to get a taste of the real thing, so we zoomed in on someone in New Orleans who'd been trapping, cooking, and eating crawfish, as they call them there, for a long while. Chef, restaurateur, and cookbook writer Isaac Toops.
Crawfish is a very communal affair down here. You buy them in giant sacks of 30 pounds, and you have a bunch of people over, and you throw them in a big boiling pot. You season them up and you eat them, you drink beer and wine and throw the kids in the pool and have music and games and debauchery.
Isaac runs 2 restaurants in New Orleans where modern Cajun cooking dominates the menu. But at home, during the season, late December until the serious heat of summer, he'll be out in his yard making a boil.
They are a freshwater species of arthropod, and they're raised in these giant fields, which are either rice fields or other crop fields that are flooded, and you dig them out the mud, quite literally, and you rinse them off and you boil them up. The real luxury is when you throw them in the ice chest afterward with a seasoning and lemon juice and vinegar, and as they cool down, the juices of that get sucked into the shell, and that's where the real seasoning takes place. And then you throw them out on a giant table, and you have this wonderful communal experience, which is very telltale sign of a Cajun and South Louisiana experience. Eating crawfish is something that is so Cajun that I can't remember the first time I ate crawfish. It's always been there. And you're always helping out with the adults, whether it's helping to fill up the water pot, and then helping to purge the crawfish, and then helping to boil the crawfish, and then one day taking over your father's responsibilities of boiling the crawfish. So it's just ingrained in us. I don't see it dying anytime soon. Whether it's you're boiling them or you go to a boil house and have them boiled for you, crawfish are so ingrained and they're so delicious I believe the habit is growing among other people. The good thing is you can buy peeled tails, and that can be thrown in pasta, that can be thrown on top of a pizza. What I like to do is scramble them in my eggs in the morning. So you can have your peeled tails at any point in time in almost anything. You can also go to a restaurant and get your crawfish po' boy or a crawfish sandwich. But boiling a sack of crawfish, it's more of a Sunday deal, Sunday during the day. Some people, like my father, he likes to make a ketchup, mayonnaise, and mustard sauce. He calls it super sauce, but he also calls that to every sauce he makes, so it may not be actual true.
Isaac Toops. But in the UK, these very tasty and very, very plentiful crustaceans are not welcome. Someone who knows a lot about why is comedian Zara Gladman, PhD.
I mentioned I am a zoologist. I actually specialise in an area of zoology called asticology. I'm sure you've all guessed what that might be. It is, of course, the study of crayfish.
Scottish comedian Zara Gladman's second ever stand-up performance. She now has her own BBC sketch show. Good for her. But that PhD I added onto her introduction is real.
Yeah, it's quite bizarre, really, but it's true. The first time I did stand-up was because I was invited to take part in a night called Bright Club, where academics do stand-up comedy about their specialist subject. So I was writing up my PhD at the time about crayfish. So yeah, it wasn't on my bingo card for my PhD experience, but that set me off on the path of doing comedy.
So how did you manage to be funny about signal crayfish? They're creepy.
They are quite creepy looking. I was given a book, How to Do Stand-Up. So I read a chapter of that and learned about the basics of joke structure and, using the rule of three. And I took quite a scientific approach, to constructing jokes. And then in terms of the topic itself, I suppose I maybe anthropomorphised them to an extent. I tried to draw similarities between myself and the crayfish.
The more I study crayfish, the more I've come to realise how alike we are. First off, both me and the crayfish enjoy food. I'm quite passionate about eating, and crayfish are no different. In fact, they're even more adventurous in their eating habits than I am. They eat things like vegetables. They eat other things as well. They eat fish and fish eggs and plants and shit.
At the time when I started my PhD, we knew that signal crayfish had been introduced to Scotland, but we didn't know how fast they were spreading. We didn't know what impact they were having on native biodiversity. So my PhD was really just to try and start to explore those questions. Unlike England has a native crayfish species called the white-clawed crayfish. But in Scotland, there are no native crayfish, so it was almost like an empty niche that the crayfish could parachute into and take over. They're omnivorous, so they will feed on plants, they'll feed on fish eggs, they're cannibalistic, so they have really wide-ranging impacts on all parts of the ecosystem. And in Scotland, we were particularly interested in their impact on species like the Atlantic salmon, because salmon fishing is such a massive industry in Scotland. We were also interested in the impact on species like the freshwater pearl mussel, which is a really endangered species in Scotland.
When you first said that they were in Scotland, I thought, I know that they can walk over land. And I thought, my God, they were introduced first into southern England. And I thought, they really walk to Scotland. But no, they were introduced to a lake in Scotland. From your research, does trapping make a difference to the numbers?
It's an interesting one. I got involved in a project where the Scottish Government had funded a trapping programme on a loch. And I went down before they did the programme, and I went down after they did the programme to see what impact the trapping had on the population. Now, during that programme, they took out something like 250,000 crayfish. And what I found was, first of all, trapping is biased towards catching big male crayfish. Males are big and aggressive, so once they occupy a trap, then that puts off the smaller crayfish and the females from entering. But overall, yes, there was a reduction in the population, but you're never going to eradicate the population. And you also have issues with smaller crayfish being able to breed. If you're wanting to remove a species, you do need to trap all stages of the life cycle. So although removing males may have reduced potentially some of the impacts of the crayfish, in terms of the impact on the population as a whole and its continuation, and it's still absolutely thriving.
Are there other ways the UK could get them under control? I mean, are there ways that would work?
I mean, there are other ways that have been explored, different control methods. I think, to be honest, if they make it into a river, your chance of controlling them is very slim. If it's a small enclosed body of water that you can potentially drain, maybe even treat with ecocides, although that is quite controversial, obviously going to have really negative impacts on other species, then it's feasible that you could remove a population. Electrofishing has been tried. I've also heard of studies where they have released sterile males with the idea that will interrupt the breeding, and genetic modifications as well, where you engineer the crayfish so that they only produce young from one sex. But to be honest, I think at this stage, the scale of their spread across the UK, the focus should really be on preventing their spread any further.
As part of your act, you also wrote and performed a song. Tell us about the song.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of pop divas like Lady Gaga, and I thought that it would be a fun way to get across some facts about crayfish in an engaging way. So it's very simple, and I thought that would be a fun way to close off my comedy set.
Comedian Zara Gladman. In last year's BBC Food and Farming Awards, we shortlisted the Kennet Crayfish Company for Best Producer, a company licensed by DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, to catch and sell signal crayfish. As one of the award judges, I spent most of the day there by the riverside, in the processing unit and kitchen. Though they were outstandingly delicious, Kennet didn't win. But they had a story that really needed telling, we thought. So a few weeks ago, I went back with Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, head judge of the awards last year, and this, a man who's done a lot of fishing, a lot of fish cooking, and a lot of writing about it. We talked to Andrew Leach, founder of the company, at his small production unit right by the banks of the River Kennet, a chalk stream that winds its way from Wiltshire until 70-odd kilometres later it joins the Thames near Reading, a river that's famed still for its purity. Drought this year had brought the river low.
This is probably a foot and a half lower than normal.
Is it really? Does the height of the river affect the size of the crayfish catch?
It's probably higher waters, higher pressure. When we get the air pressure higher, we do catch more. And the moon phase is really quite key. When the moon's coming from half moon up to full moon, we catch a lot of large crayfish. Once you go over the moon, you get a mixed bag, and then even further on, you catch a lot of smalls.
Amazing.
Andrew used to run a much bigger operation, exporting live signal crayfish from different parts of the UK until the trade was stopped 5 years ago, when regulations were updated, making it illegal to sell them live.
We've had to adapt, so we're working on newer products. It's basically the quality of the crayfish is pretty much our ethos of the company. Prior to 2020, we were making a massive dent in it. When we first started, every crayfish trap had 3 to 4 kilos in it. It didn't really matter where you put it. Now you've got to get quite cute where you put them, a bit more skill in it.
So you can actually impact your local bit of river by hitting them hard, harvesting them, getting on top of it.
Yeah, definitely. You've got to hit it hard though. Tickling it doesn't work. So we hit local areas quite hard for a couple of weeks, then move on to another area, just keeping a lid on it really, because we haven't got the sales to cover what we could catch.
There is big potential still, says Andrew, of a serious market within the UK for crayfish. But
the Chinese market in this one little fish shop supplies a lot of Chinese. He reckoned he could sell 3 tonne a week.
To Chinese customers in the UK?
In the UK. We've offered them par-cooked, fully cooked, and there's no chance.
Because they want them alive?
They want them live.
And you're not allowed anymore to move a live crayfish anywhere. I mean, you're allowed to move them from here to your processing plants, but literally nowhere else.
That's right, unless it's going to somewhere to be eradicated.
Which they are.
Which they are, but there's no guarantee that customer would eradicate them.
I mean, the key to this is that Brits, we don't eat crayfish.
Except in a sandwich of a well-known takeaway offering, and the crayfish all are imported. in the end, to be super convenient in high numbers for catering, hospitality, people want picked tails, don't they? Labour costs are always going to make that hard in the UK.
Right.
So you have to create a gourmet product which sells whole crayfish where people appreciate the wholeness of the crayfish. My worry is that's always going to be a bit niche.
Most of our customers are Eastern European, Russian or Ukrainians living in this country.
We're standing by the banks. I mean, are they just swimming about in the water? I mean, where do they live?
One of their biggest problems is that they burrow into the banks as well. And you see lots of little 3-inch holes that everybody sort of thinks, oh, they're rat holes. But they're not, they're crayfish burrows. But of course, there's one every foot. And once they go back and build this big burrow, it becomes a very big burrow. And then that 3 to 4 foot collapses and goes into the river.
So the sheer numbers of crayfish burrowing into the banks mean that every time a bit of the bank collapses, that's soil being washed in, silting up the gravel, changing the biology of the river.
The ecosystem, yes, it is. And the rivers are getting wider, they're shallower, and they flood more.
But they're also hungry things that grow fast, and they are voraciously eating what in the river?
Basically, anything. The problem is that when the fish spawn, trout are doing quite well because they spawn in the winter when the crayfish are less active. All the other fish spawn in the summer, so as soon as they spawn, the crayfish just come in and hoover up the eggs.
So fish like barbel, roach, rudd, carp spawning in the river, and the crayfish just clean up their eggs?
Yeah, it's just free food for them.
Andrew's pulling in a quite small plastic pot. Oh, it's absolutely heaving with crayfish. That only went in last night?
Yeah, that's last night.
Baited with a bit of mackerel, is it?
Yep.
Looking at that's more than a kilo, right?
It's a mixed bag. This is where we're just going over the moon.
That's a big one. Amazing.
That's a male, but just look how clean it is.
Yeah, lovely size of the tail and big claws. I mean, could definitely get some meat out of those claws. Not going to let you get near them right now.
No. So that's probably a good 10 or 12 years old.
Some of the small ones are probably too small to make much of a mouthful or be worth processing, but once you've caught them, you're not allowed to put them back, nor would you, I mean, for good reason.
Yeah.
What's the plan for the really titchy ones?
Well, we used to sell a lot of them for the zoo trade, for animal feed.
What zoo animals like a little crayfish as a treat?
Well, you got otters and that, salamanders, I believe. We do sell a few smaller ones to people who have their own pufferfish.
Oh, in an aquarium?
Yeah, and it's very good for their teeth.
Aquariums and zoos, however, are not a big enough market, so Andy and his team are working on new products, as we'll hear and taste later. But before that, one last trap.
That is a very full trap.
That is good.
It just happened to be the one that I pulled. That's my catch, Andrew.
All right.
It's definitely the fullest trap so far.
Yeah.
Maybe half as much or almost twice as much as the last one. But Sheila, you saw many times that number when you were here last year.
Okay. Many times. As Natalie said it then, you know, it made us feel a bit creepy.
They move over each other.
Yeah.
They seethe, don't they?
They
seethe.
seethe.
You've got to be quick when you pick them up because those claws do move fast and they're very, very nippy. Ah!
Oh my God, he got you!
Lucky.
That was I got away with that one. He did close his claw on me, but he didn't really pinch home. Gave me a little reminder though, because that has happened to me before.
We leave the river with our bucket full of seething, accurate word that, invasive signal crayfish, taking them to Andrew's processing unit not far away, where they'll be prepared for sale to restaurants, fishmongers and home cooks.
So we're in a large metal barn with 10 or a dozen tanks with different crayfish in, and they're being purged. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah. These crayfish came in this morning, so they'll be purged in there for a couple of days.
Purging means essentially they don't eat for a couple of days and that empties their gut, so any toxins or matter that they've eaten is just naturally gone.
Yeah.
So they've got these big shades on, which helps keep the water cool and keep them out of direct sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. So we try and keep them stress-free as possible.
After the purging, the size grading.
So it's just a riddle system with parallel metal bars, and if they're small enough, they go through to the next stage, and if they're too big...
They don't like the light, so we haven't got any cover here.
They go down if they could?
If they could, yes.
And if they're too big to go down, then they're graded as the big guys.
Then they're stunned, 10 kilos at a time.
It's 330 volts and 28 amps.
So basically you're electrocuting the whole water and anything in it is going to be stunned instantly.
Yes.
And then after that, they can go straight to be cooked.
Yeah.
In the daily way of things at the Kennet Crayfish Company, the crayfish are boiled, either part cooked or cooked through, and vacuum packed in brine. But today, it's not quite the same. Hugh's going to be doing some experimenting in the test kitchen.
I can't help seeing that you've got this very interesting other byproduct called Kennet Crayfish Gin. One of the things when you're cooking shellfish, you can develop a particular bisky flavour by putting the shell in contact with very high heat. So either by putting it in hot oil or by flambéing it with burning alcohol. If you just boil it in water, you never quite get that flavour. So looking at your gin and looking at these recently stunned crayfish ready for cooking, I'm thinking flambé in crayfish gin. If that shell is going red fast, then we should be developing the flavour. And once I've turned them over a few times, then we'll give it a second hit. The colour of that now. Incredible bright orange. I think we are ready. Into the gin. You can smell two things there. The delicious smell of caramelising crayfish shell and the burning hairs on the back of my hand. I know which one I prefer.
Cooked, Hugh serves them with a butter, dill and crayfish gin sauce.
If you squeeze the edges of the tail together, if you get the two, then peel them back out the other way, that releases a whole juicy tail.
Whereas I have not, mine has come in half.
I have one on me, Sheila.
That's seriously good.
I'm glad you like it. I mean, generous with the butter, generous with the dill, but it's the flambéing of the shells that creates that richness.
Wow.
After the flambéing, Hugh moves on to Andy's ready cooked.
I'm going to make a little dill dipping sauce, which is just basically playing around with half mayonnaise, half yogurt, bit of mustard, lots of fresh chopped dill. I think this will be a really nice, easy way for friends and family to eat it. Maybe just a tiny bit of chopped gherkin, cornichon. These are chilled, cooked, brined. I mean, so easy to eat from the brine, crack it open. That combination of crayfish and dill, that's the Scandi secret, isn't it? And it works well here.
But the business is set on expanding, which means developing more products, more easier for Brits to eat products. And it's chef Anna Fiddler, a neighbour of Andrew's on the Kennet, who's doing the product development.
You guys have tried the big ones, and that's what people want to buy and eat. They don't really want the little ones. So we started making a butter based on the sort of beurre d'omard recipes, and then from the butter we use the remnants of the crayfish shell to make a bisque, and then the remnants of that get dried into something quite magical, which is coming down the line.
Oh, wow. Which of them are not so top secret that we're allowed to taste them right now?
We're allowed to try the bisque and the butters. This is warm because we made it this morning.
Oh, it's got a lovely crayfish smell.
Thank you. So it's very simple. I use the butter-infused crayfish shell, crayfish gin.
That's going in everything clearly around here. Why wouldn't you?
Exactly. Instead of brandy. No cream.
Compared to a lobster bisque, I like it because it's a little bit lighter. A lobster or crab bisque can be very heavy and usually quite salty.
So the idea is we would want it to be an ambient product that we can get a decent shelf life out of.
You are a cook and you've written cookbooks, and is this a way to familiarise a bigger audience to crayfish, to make it more ordinary?
Well, that's a great point, actually, because we're not really a shellfish eating nation. And I find that sometimes people are put off by the removing of the shell and all that lovely stuff. So yeah, perhaps that's a great idea, is that the butter and the bisque is a nice way to maybe awaken them to the fact that actually they're beautifully tasting things.
It's a gateway crayfish.
A gateway crayfish, my goodness, yeah.
But that's not a truth universally accepted. It seems from our research that for the majority of scientists and ecologists, eating signal crayfish is definitely a no-no. Why? Well, Vanessa Barlow is the crayfish project officer at the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. Their focus is on protecting the native white-clawed crayfish.
So the north still have a few remaining populations hanging on. Definitely the south has been more heavily impacted by signal crayfish, but I know in the southwest they do still have some remaining white-clawed crayfish populations. But yeah, at the moment the outlook isn't looking great for them. We monitor them and we do habitat enhancements where we can to improve the habitat for the crayfish. We also create arc sites, so we move crayfish populations where they're under threat from signal crayfish to locations where they'll be safe and able to thrive.
So, with no known ways to eradicate the invasive signals, why not just eat them?
I guess there are a few issues in terms of encouraging people to eat crayfish. So if they're doing it for environmental reasons, there isn't any evidence to show we can eradicate signal crayfish populations. Native white-clawed crayfish can grow to a large size as well, so there is that risk of them being misidentified. There's also a risk of catching other protected species in traps, such as water vole and otter. There was a BBC News article that actually came out this week showing that a legal crayfish trap was removed from a river, I think near Peterborough, and that had a dead otter in it. And then there's also risk of spreading disease between watercourses if people are moving traps, such as the crayfish plague, which is carried by signal crayfish and completely deadly to our native white-clawed crayfish.
But what we're talking about is a licensed company. We're not talking about people just putting a trap in a river and the traps, there's no way an otter could get into those traps. So you think encouraging people to eat them might be a dangerous thing to do?
If people take from this that they can go out and trap themselves, I think that's definitely not something that we want to happen. If it's done through a licensed company, then obviously I don't personally have an issue with that.
The company that we've been to visit, the Kennet Crayfish Company, the owner says he could get rid of many more crayfish if he were only allowed to sell them live. Now, that's not allowed under current legislation. Why would selling them live to be eaten be such a problem?
Yeah, I find that concerning because, again, the associated risk of people potentially releasing, either accidental or on purpose, those live crayfish into river catchments.
Part of your work is trying to educate the public about crayfish and the existence, as you said, of the native white-clawed crayfish. What's your message when you're talking to the public?
If they do see a crayfish, to report it, because it's really useful in terms of monitoring. And then I'd also promote Check Clean Dry campaign. So that's a campaign around biosecurity. If you're going out anywhere really, walking in the countryside, going near rivers, once you've finished your walk or your wild swim, or if you've been out fishing, to make sure you clean your equipment down and then thoroughly dry it out, because crayfish plague can live on damp equipment for up to 2 weeks.
What is crayfish plague?
Crayfish plague is a fungal-like disease that signal crayfish brought over from the US, and white-clawed crayfish have absolutely no immunity towards it. So when it's introduced into a system where they are, it will wipe them out in a matter of weeks. There's been a number of crayfish plague outbreaks within Yorkshire over the past couple of years, and we haven't found signal crayfish present to have brought them over. So it's likely that they were brought over by other means, either through recreational activities from humans or something else.
The other issue, I gather, is crayfish breed when they're very small, and they're not the ones that get trapped.
Yeah, so there was a really interesting study done by Chadwick et al. On this. So they drew down a section of a river where there was signal crayfish present, and they did this 3 times and removed all the signal crayfish that they could find. And this gave a good indication of what the population looked like in terms of size. And they found that only 2.3% of the population was actually of trappable size. So we're looking at, nearly 98% of that population that isn't even going to get caught in traps.
Vanessa Barlow from the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. There are now millions of the invasive crayfish in our rivers. Trapping them for food, as done on the River Kennet, won't, it seems, eradicate them. But nothing else works any better. When you taste what Hugh cooked, it's easy to get enthusiastic, but promoting them as delicious food could backfire if it encourages people to trap them for their own use, possibly spreading them further or spreading disease. We asked DEFRA, the Department for Food and Rural Affairs, for their views. They told us eating invasive crayfish is not recommended, and there is no evidence that this is an efficient management measure. and that both the Environment Agency and Natural England manage the licenses that allow some trapping of invasive crayfish for movement to processing plants where they are killed. But beyond that, there is a total ban on the movement of live crayfish. They added, the removal of signal crayfish under license is part of our overall management approach aimed at the population control of this species in England, and there are no current plans to amend this. We did invite some of the supermarkets to join this discussion, but got no response. I was in Anglesey 2 weeks ago, where, accidentally, I met Bent Saxmark, a Swede who runs a mushroom company with his English wife, but more relevantly for this programme, someone who loves crayfish. I was out walking when we met. He asked me for directions to the beach path, and I recognised his Swedish accent. So, with crayfish on my mind, I grilled him on his crayfish views. Then, back home, I phoned him, got him on a video call, and pressed the record button.
Swedes in general are crazy about crayfish. The whole kit and caboodle with the songs and the preparations and the schnapses. It's a strong bond to eat crayfish.
Bent grew up on the west coast of Sweden, and what he calls crayfish from the sea, and we call langoustines, are his favourites. But freshwater crayfish are what most Swedes eat at the crayfish parties that are an essential part of the Swedish summer and early autumn.
You have the proper parties, and after that you have it occasionally.
So do you buy the crayfish live, or are they already dead?
The trend is more to buy them ready cooked. That trend started maybe 20 years ago, but in the past you always bought them live. And then the most important thing when you cook them is the dill. We call it krondill. When the flowers have seeds, that flavor is the most important ingredient. You have bibs with crayfish on. You have a special tool to dig out the meat from the claws, and paper moons. You prep with sheets with schnapps songs.
What are schnapps songs?
Like the famous Helen Gore.
How does that go?
Helen Gore, sjung hopp fadrallallalej. Helen Gore, sjung hopp fadrallalej. Och den som inte helan tar, han heller inte halvan får. Helen Gore, sjung hopp fadrallalej. I mean, the lyrics are not very intelligent, but it means if you don't drink the whole schnapps, basically you don't deserve a half of it. So you have to drink the whole thing in one go.
So you have crayfish, drink some schnapps, sing, eat some more crayfish, drink some more schnapps.
Basically, yes, and have a very good time. I would say if the weather allows, you sit outside. It's very messy. That's why you need bibs and lots of serviettes, and because it's... You eat with the whole face, basically, and slurps.
So, let's presume for a moment that eating signal crayfish is part of the answer to eradicating them. How would Bent persuade British people to love crayfish as much as the Swedes?
We have tried, because on our terrace here in New Mills, we have a crayfish party, I think 20 years back. And it started with crayfish only, and all the condiments like Västerbotten cheese pie and nice dips with roe and everything. But they really, really struggled. We even had certificates how you could handle the crayfish to get the meat out. But they are not so patient. They want it basically ready peeled. The thing with having a Swedish style crayfish party, you can spend hours and hours for very little meat and just chat, sing, drink.
That's so interesting, because what you are saying is that to enjoy crayfish, you have to enjoy the whole socializing.
As well as being outside and just enjoy the sky and hear the birds and the wind and just be part of the nature.
Bent Saxmark. Back at the Crayfish Company, however, there's still a lot of excitement and optimism about the pleasures of crayfish.
Amazing work that you're doing, Andrew. Seeing these things coming out of the river where you know they're doing so much damage, going through a very well thought out process. And then I love this no waste angle, the using up of all the bits and the smaller crayfish into the bisque and the butters. People should get involved with British crayfish. In Scandinavia, that crayfish party is something that everyone remembers from the school holidays. By the lake, we're off to the lake for the weekend, we're going to have a huge crayfish party.
And it must be said, a lot of our customers, English customers, are elderly people, which is going back to the days when you tried whatever food was available, or you were told that's what you're eating for supper, like I was when I was younger.
Andrew Leach from the Kennet Crayfish Company. Thanks for listening. The podcast was produced by Natalie Donovan in Bristol. We both had quite a lot of fun making this programme, so we hope you enjoyed it.
I'm Shari Val. I've been investigating fraud for more than 20 years. It is not them being gullible or stupid. These are criminals, and it's often very organised.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Carter. I'm a criminologist and a forensic linguist.
Liz, your red flag's gone up.
This is this gap in contact. It's an incredibly powerful mechanism.
I'm Alex Wood. I used to be a prolific fraudster, but now I help the police to catch people like me. And that's very clever because he's mirroring the bank and the police's own security messaging.
Listen now to Scam Secrets on BBC Sounds.